Well, I'm 102 years old. It took me that long to figure out something I could probably tell you in about 10 minutes. So if you've got 10 minutes, I can save you a century of doing it wrong. Seems like a fair trade. I grew up Swedish Lutheran in Duluth, Minnesota, back when winters were long and conversations were short. If you know anything about Scandinavians, you know we don't make a fuss. We don't raise our voices. We don't ask for more than our share. And we certainly don't do anything that isn't practical. My mother's favorite sentence was, "That's not practical." I wanted a red dress once, bright red, hanging in the window downtown. "That's not practical, Ruth." Brown would last longer. Brown wouldn't draw attention. So I wore brown. I wanted to stay up late reading novels under the covers. That's not practical. Sleep was practical. I wanted to go to college. "Oh, Ruth," my mother said, soft but firm, "that's not practical for a girl." So I learned something early. I learned to adjust my wanting. I didn't stop wanting. I just trained myself to want practical things. And I became very good at it, very sensible, very steady, very dependable, a good girl. I was a good girl for 102 years. What a waste. Now don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying responsibility is foolish. I'm not saying throw away common sense. I'm saying I never once stopped to ask myself what I wanted before asking what was sensible. There's a difference. When you're young, practicality feels like intelligence. It feels like maturity. It feels like the responsible way to build a safe life. But safety is not the same as living. That's the illusion. You think if you make careful choices, nothing bad will happen. But something bad does happen. You shrink. Every time you choose the safe thing over the thing that makes your heart beat just a little faster, you shrink a bit. It's subtle. Nobody applauds when you shrink. They say, "What a sensible girl." And you glow with approval. You don't realize you're disappearing. I didn't. By the time I noticed, decades had passed. In 1947, I was 23 years old. I had two men who wanted to marry me. Carl Johansson, steady, polite, owned a hardware store. His handshake was firm. My parents liked him immediately. He had numbers written all over him, predictable numbers. Then there was Thomas Brennan, Irish, played piano in a jazz band at a smoky little place near the lake. He made me laugh until I couldn't breathe. He talked about Chicago like it was a living creature, said we could move there and see what happened. See what happened. Those words terrified me, because seeing what happens is not practical. My parents approved of Carl. They did not approve of Thomas. I married Carl. It was sensible. We had a neat wedding, 3 children, a modest but tidy home with curtains that matched the couch. Carl was a good man, kind enough, faithful enough, responsible. We had 51 years together, and I cannot remember a single moment when my chest felt like it might burst from joy. Not one. There were pleasant days, comfortable holidays, quiet evenings, but no fire. I told myself fire was dangerous. Fire burns things down. Better to have a furnace set to a reasonable temperature. When Carl died in 1998, I stood at his funeral receiving condolences. People said, 51 years, what a blessing. I nodded, and I felt nothing. That frightened me more than grief would have. I had been so busy being practical for 5 decades that I had forgotten how to feel deeply at all. I heard years later that Thomas Brennan moved to Chicago like he said he would, became a music teacher, Married someone who loved jazz as much as he did. I never asked for details. It wasn't practical to look backward. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what it would have been like to choose laughter over security. Maybe it would have been a disaster. Maybe I'd have ended up broke and heartbroken. But at least I would have known what it felt like to choose something that stirred me. Instead, I chose calm waters, and calm waters can be very quiet, too quiet. The cost wasn't only mine. I passed it down. Eric wanted to be an artist. I told him that wasn't practical. He became an accountant. Anna wanted to move to California in her 20s. I told her that was too far, too risky. She lives 20 minutes from me now, safe, sensible. Peter fell in love with a woman I thought was too wild, too loud. I advised against it. He married someone steady. They divorced anyway. I thought I was protecting them. I was giving them my fear. Fear dressed up as wisdom, practicality wrapped in a cardigan. Now my children are in their 70s, good people, solid lives. And sometimes I see the same question in their eyes that I see in my mirror. Is this all there was? That is the cost. It's not poverty, it's not scandal, it's not catastrophe, it's smallness, a small, tidy life that never quite stretched its limbs. At 102, there's not much illusion left. The furniture in this house has outlived most of my friends. The clock in the hallway ticks louder than it used to. Or maybe I just hear it better now. What remains after a century of sensibility? Regret, yes, but also clarity. I understand something now that would have been useful at 23. Being practical is not the same as being smart. Being sensible is not the same as being safe. A practical life can still feel empty. A sensible life can still leave you wondering who you were meant to be. If you are facing a choice right now between the safe option and the one that makes your pulse quicken just a little, pause, not to calculate, not to impress anyone, just to ask yourself quietly, what do I want? I never asked that question, not once, and that silence shaped my entire life. I never learned to swim, didn't see the point. I never wore red. I never traveled outside Minnesota until I was 63 years old. I never played an instrument. I never said what I truly thought if it risked making someone uncomfortable. I never did something simply because it might be fun. At 102, I couldn't tell you my favorite color. Isn't that something? A whole century, and I don't know my own preferences because I never practiced having them. That's the tragedy of too much practicality. You lose contact with yourself. What remains, though, is this small flicker of honesty. I cannot go back to 1947. I cannot step into that jazz club again and say yes to Chicago. But you can still say yes to something. You don't have to be reckless. Just be willing to be slightly impractical sometimes. Take the trip, wear the bright color, speak the thought gently but clearly. Let your children chase something uncertain without clipping their wings out of fear. Because here is what 102 years have taught me. Every time you choose only safety, you shrink a little. And if you shrink long enough, you disappear. You become a person who survives beautifully but never quite lives. I survived. I was steady. I never embarrassed anyone. I never made a mess. And I am sitting here now with tidy rooms and orderly drawers and a lifetime of wondering what might have happened if I had allowed myself to be just a little foolish. So please, be impractical sometimes. Be inefficient. Be a little bit bold. Make a small mess in your careful life, because messes mean something happened. And when you are my age, looking back across a long, quiet stretch of years, you won't regret the mistakes you made nearly as much as the chances you never took. Oh, and if anyone happens to know what became of Thomas Brennan, no, never mind. That's not practical either. But after all these years, I still wonder.